So the president is getting ready to speak live in Camp David. And we're not going to take it because very rarely, if ever, does he say anything newsworthy unless he does it like accidentally. And he says something that people just simply can't understand, doesn't make any sense. It's a provable lie. And my favorite, when he can't figure out how to get off the stage. I mean, really, if you think about it, when Joe Biden actually does, these press conferences and such, you really never know what's going to happen, but it's almost never good for the president. He'll say something that nobody can understand. Then, of course, knucklehead talk show hosts like me will play it over and over and over again, just to make fun of him. But then again, of course, it's how does he get off of the stage? And it's not. I'm always fascinated by this. You ever watch the president's press conferences or what have you when he's up on a stage, he's up at the podium, and he, God bless our troops and God bless America. And then it's like he looks to his left, he looks to his right, he tries to shake hands with the ghost. Nobody really knows where he's going or what he's doing. Finally, somebody says, Joe, over here. And he does that little Biden jog off of the stage. Yeah, other than that, really nothing happens at the Biden press conferences. Anyway, if he actually does say anything newsworthy, we will most certainly cover it for you here on WMAL. Again, Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. And it would also be kind of funny if whoever is introducing the president introduces him as Robert Peters or Robin Ware or J.R.B. Ware. Because as you no doubt know by now, those are the president's pseudonyms that he was using to, it would appear, to obfuscate and hide what he was doing with Hunter Biden, his son. Y'all know the story by now. James Comer, House Oversight, wants to know why the president was using these pseudonyms in emails discovered on Hunter Biden's laptop. What was the president trying to do? Was he trying to avoid, maybe FOIA requests? Maybe that's what it was? I don't know. But, I'm of the opinion that you don't use pseudonyms and fake email addresses unless you know that you're doing something wrong. And back when Joe Biden was the vice president, it's a big news today, he was using these, fake email addresses. So now James Comer, House Oversight, is asking a lot of questions, as he should. They specifically want an unredacted document that indicates that then Vice President Joe Biden took a call with the president of Ukraine on May 27th, 2016. In preparation for that call, there was back and forth within these pseudonym-laden emails. Republicans say the document was emailed to Robert L. Peters, which, by the way, I will say that at the very least, that's not nearly as bad as like Carlos Danger, but I'm just saying. Robert L. Peters, which is a pseudonym the House Oversight Committee has identified as then Vice President Joe Biden. Additionally, the committee questions why the then Vice President's son, Hunter Biden, and only Hunter Biden, was copied on this email to the Vice President. And part of what they were going back and forth on was this speech, a draft of a speech that the vice president then was going to give to the parliament there in Ukraine. Oh, and wait a minute. What exactly was it that the president was going to be giving in this speech? What was he going to be saying? What he was going to be saying was that they needed to fire that prosecutor that was looking into Burisma, where his son Hunter was on the board making, millions of dollars working on this board when he actually had, as you know, absolutely no qualifications. And so all of these stories are just, clearly an indication to the there's no evidence crowd that there is evidence of wrongdoing. Joe Biden used various private email addresses from which he would sometimes send, receive, and forward government correspondence, according to emails found, again, on Hunter Biden's now famous laptop. Here's the other point, is that I guess this was something, they did in the Obama administration. Now, maybe this is something that, happens here in Washington, D.C. Maybe, some of you folks know. But I'm just going to tell you, it looks a little sus. So now Comer is asking for unrestricted special access to email messages to and from VP Biden and Hunter. I assume that includes all of these emails with these pseudonyms, clearly. There's also a new issue regarding that speech he gave on December 9th, 2015. The one I was just talking about, where Biden touted his anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine and urged an overhaul and reform of the Office of the General Prosecutor. And that was, again, during the time when the prosecutor, Victor Shokin, was investigating Burisma with Hunter Biden on the board. So as this continues to go on and as this conversation continues, you look at all of this and you look at the timeline. December 4th, 2015, what happened on that date? There's that call with Hunter and Burisma executives with Joe on the speakerphone. That was in Dubai. You've got December 9th, 5 days later, Joe travels to Ukraine and he gives that speech in Ukraine demanding they change that prosecutor. Then, of course, we know what happened after that.
Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Yeah, they got fired. Imagine that. After the $10 million went into the, the pockets of Joe and Hunter Biden. After that, of course, the Bidens continued to get money from Burisma. And so there's all of this, at least to me, and it is so frustrating when I hear the "there's no evidence" crowd. I'm going to start calling them like the ostrich crowd, heads buried right there in the sand. By the way, in May of 2016, and I know there's a lot of dates and there's a lot of accusations, and I try not to get too in the weeds on this stuff, but this really does matter. Because people are using the term bribery to describe the current president of the United States. May of 2016, there was more correspondence between Joe and Hunter about an upcoming call between the VP and Ukraine's president. Hunter was the only person on the email. Now, all of this goes back to Joe Biden saying for how long? That he didn't know anything about the relationship with Hunter Biden and some of these foreign dignitaries. Joe Biden, he's been saying all this time, I don't know anything about my son's overseas business dealings. Now, it is obvious that was a lie. I mean, you can't even the White House is spun out of that one. But now it's, Joe Biden never worked within Hunter's business dealings. Well, okay, that looks like that was a lie too. Because as vice president to Obama, as Joe is the main source for Ukraine. He's the guy in charge of our relationship with Ukraine as vice president. His son is on the board of Burisma that is being investigated by Ukraine. So then Joe jumps into action and demands that prosecutor be fired. There's no evidence, people, the ostrich people out there, they don't see anything wrong with that? Oh, okay. Now, a lot of people, of course, saying that when you use pseudonyms, it's because it allows them to evade FOIA requests. That's, of course, again, Freedom of Information Acts. This is from The Hill. It was reportedly common for high-profile elected officials and appointees in the administration to have secondary government email accounts. But an oversight committee spokesperson said it is concerning that Biden had multiple email accounts with fake names. Well, yeah, I'd say so. Again, as the younger crowd tends to say, it looks just a little sus. By the way, one of my favorite guys, John Solomon from Just the News, he was on with Sean Hannity last night.
We've known about these private email addresses since 2 years ago when I first reported on them. There are other instances where you see Joe Biden using a private email address to forward sensitive government information to Hunter Biden. There's a time where a U.S. hostage is about to be released from Turkey. It's not public yet. Joe Biden has it forwarded to his private email address at work. He then sends it to Hunter Biden, so Hunter Biden would be in the know. This email system that James Comer's looking at, I think, is going to be very instructive. Joe Biden, from time to time, was feeding his son information about foreign matters.
Yeah, and this term commingling is being used by John Solomon during this interview. And Solomon says, watch for this term being used. Again, commingling. Basically, that means that there's, at least to me, how I'm interpreting it, is that there's a lot of gray area where Joe's duties as vice president sort of overlap his very clear business relationship with Hunter Biden, of course, to the benefit of what I would, of course, call the Biden crime family. And the evidence is out there.
The word commingling is going to mean a lot because James Comer has relentlessly gone through these evidence and he's shown commingling. First, it was a commingling of a phone. Hunter Biden paid for a phone for his dad. His dad would call a phone every so often and dial in and talk to his business partners. They commingled some private dinners and brought his business partners along. Today, we learned they commingled private email addresses. And of course, Hunter Biden is learning things that were reserved for the vice president and national security staff.
Look, everybody knows if you listen to WMAL, friends, you are tuned in to WMAL, but you're also tuned into what's going on. What's going on with the president, what's going on when he was vice president, and all of these accusations that are swirling around Joe and Hunter Biden. And the evidence does just continue to pile up. I mean, look, you've got the money trail. You've got the $10 million going to Joe and Hunter from Burisma. You've got the 1023, which alleges there are tapes and emails documenting all of this, probably text messages as well. You've got the testimony of Devin Archer and Tony Bobulinski and others alleging the bribery schemes. You've got the money trail from shell companies to the Biden family. Now you've got these emails with the then VP using pseudonyms. And it's Joe and Hunter discussing speeches, discussing policy. What was Joe going to do to give Ukraine's parliament the advice, the guidance to stop the investigation into Burisma? I mean, to me, that's obviously why they were going back and forth. I mean, maybe there's more to the story, but, you know, my question is anybody going to actually ask the president about these aliases? Is anybody going to ask a cringe Jean-Pierre? I'm sure they will, and I'm sure you know what she'll say. She'll say, oh, the president did nothing wrong. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. She'll get all breathy. Well, I've talked about this a lot, you know, and then that's what she does. Meantime, you've got the VP and his son talking about Ukrainian policy and Joe's speech to the parliament where he was going to effectively tell them they needed to fire the guy who was investigating Burisma. I mean, look, I don't know what else you need. To me, it's all very obvious. Greg Jarrett, again, from Fox News, he was talking about how there is, simply put, more than enough evidence.
There's already more than enough evidence to bring a criminal case against Joe Biden for bribery, as bribery. And, you know, he's aiding and abetting his son. He's an accessory. Devin Archer made it abundantly clear that Joe Biden was not only involved, but they were selling access to him, promises of influence, and running protection for Burisma. You know, get your dad on the phone. The next thing we know, Joe Biden travels to Ukraine, fires the prosecutor who had already seized many of the assets of Zoloshevsky, the CEO of Burisma. They were in a panic. They turned to Hunter and Joe Biden to get rid of their problem, which vanished.
And by the way, coming up at 3:35, after the news at 3:35, Sarah Bedford is going to join us, political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner, to discuss the discovery of Joe Biden's aliases. And so we'll talk about that. By the way, did you see this headline? You know, when I know that sometimes people say you just can't make this stuff up, and it almost to the point sounds cliche. But you can't make this stuff up. The headline from the Daily Mail: Hunter Biden stayed at the White House for 2 weeks after agreeing to since-collapsed plea deal, around the same time that cocaine was found on the premises. And here's a stunner. The White House staff, they were unaware. Now, look, I've never been to the White House. Someday would love to go, but I've never been to the White House. I know it's, you know, larger than most homes. But how can you have Hunter Biden walking around unshaven in a bathrobe, God knows on what, and nobody notices? He stayed there for 2 weeks. You folks who have been to the White House, does that seem plausible to you? Is it possible that people didn't know that he was, walking around the White House, that he was staying there and nobody knew anything? That just, it seems bizarre to me. They say most of Joe Biden's aides were unaware of Hunter's extended stay on the premises. Biden's aides strenuously avoid, they say, discussing Hunter, and his ongoing legal woes because they believe their contributions and ideas would not be welcome. We got some news earlier today. This is from Reuters, but it's all over the place. Donald Trump is going to skip the Republican debate, and instead he's going to have an interview with ex-Fox News host Tucker Carlson. That's according to the New York Times. There's a lot of people that say that, Donald Trump is chicken and he should be out there, giving, participating in the debate. I understand why people believe that Donald Trump should debate the likes of Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy and so forth. I do understand that. But at the same time, one could make the argument that he's proven. Donald Trump had 4 years in office. We know what he's about. We know what he's got. And we understand that he had a very successful first 4 years. The former president feels like he doesn't have to debate. Ultimately, the voters will decide. Dan Mandis here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. 3:35 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. How are you? You happy it's Friday? I know I am. I bet Joe is too. Hunter as well. Sarah Bedford, I bet, Sarah, you're happy that it's Friday. Political investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. And Sarah, just reading some of your various articles here on the Washington Examiner's website. You are all over this stuff, and so I'm glad to have you on. We're talking about, the big news story of the day. Because, Sarah, I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like every single day there's yet another, I would say, example or piece of evidence that shows that clearly Joe Biden, my opinion, was working with Hunter Biden in these business ventures. And the proof is certainly in the emails of Robert L. Peters, Robin Ware, and J.R.B. Ware. These are the pseudonyms that the then vice president was using to communicate with his son Hunter. And, Sarah, as you've reported, most of these emails that were business related were all about Ukraine.
That's right. I mean, these are emails that didn't really catch the attention of, reporters and the public, even though they've been out there for years, because they didn't involve Joe Biden's name. They involved the pseudonym Robert Peters, who wasn't easily identifiable as Joe Biden. And so, they were just sort of hiding there in plain sight. There's not a lot of meat to the messages that I reported on and that have been cited now, but they are really significant when you put them in the context of what was happening at the time in May and June of 2016, when Hunter Biden is inexplicably being copied on internal emails about his father's schedule. In May 2016, Vice President Biden was getting ready to have a significant phone call with the president of Ukraine. And in June 2016, he was getting ready to meet in Washington with the Ukrainian prime minister and announce the big aid package to Ukraine. And so there are legitimate questions about why Hunter Biden, who was doing lucrative work in Ukraine at that time, would have been copied on official emails about those formal meetings.
Well, and the question I would have is, if they were trying to hide something, which clearly they were because they were using pseudonyms, part of what I'm seeing written is that this was to avoid FOIA requests. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting if that was indeed the reason. It very well could be. But, the White House and the Office of the President, the Vice President, are typically even more insulated from the requirements of FOIA than the rest of the federal government. The Secretary of State famously used a private email during the same administration to shield her communications, but those were a lot more vulnerable to FOIA requests than the White House. I will say that the fact that Joe Biden was using the pseudonyms, though, is not in and of itself nefarious necessarily. But it does mean that there could be more communications out there involving business partners of Hunter Biden's, involving these sensitive discussions that just have flown under the radar because these pseudonyms weren't clear.
Well, it's interesting because you're right, and you bring up a great point, which is, Hillary, we all know what she did. Again, part of the reporting on this has been that quite a few members of the Obama White House had these pseudonyms. I don't know. Is this something that is typical in Washington, D.C. Amongst folks where, government officials do have pseudonyms?
He's certainly not the first one. And, so I don't, we've seen this before with other politicians, sometimes for, nefarious purposes. Everybody remembers Anthony Weiner. He used one in his private communications.
Carlos Danger, yep.
That's right. And sometimes for innocuous reasons. But, this does open up a whole new avenue in terms of document requests for congressional investigators who may have just been looking for communications that mention Joe Biden by name. Now, there's a whole other set of records that they can sort of request from the Biden administration, and that's exactly what they've done. They've gone to the National Archives and they've asked for these emails that might involve Hunter Biden's business partners. Because remember, the messages that I cited in my report that we're talking about right now are just the ones involving Hunter Biden, and that's only because he left his laptop at a computer shop. There could be other messages directly between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's business partners, right? We don't know that, but there could be. And because we now know the aliases that Joe Biden used, that's something that congressional investigators can now go and ask for.
Now, we've known that he utilized aliases for quite some time, I believe. I mean, is this new information, or is this like new information on an old story? I mean, how long have we known about these pseudonyms?
It's a little bit of both, and it's a new request from the House Oversight Committee. The request was pretty specific, which makes one wonder if they have an idea of what they're looking for. And I thought the most interesting part of that House Oversight Committee request was specifically for all drafts of the speech that then Vice President Joe Biden was preparing to give in Ukraine in December 2015. Every draft that was written between November 1st, 2015 and December 9th, 2015. And, why would they want specifically drafts that were written within a 1-month period in 2015? I think it could be that they have some idea of what they'd be looking for in those documents. It's not exactly clear what. But that speech, the Ukrainian Rada, in 2015 was really significant because that's when Joe Biden went to Ukraine and demanded the removal of the then prosecutor general of Ukraine, which was investigating his son's company. So, perhaps they're looking at whether any of Hunter Biden's business partners played a role in helping to draft that speech, which would be hugely significant if that was the case.
Well, yeah, it sounds like if they can tie that, because you've got Joe Biden, vice president. He's in charge of, our relationship with Ukraine and the $1 billion and all that. And he is sending drafts of that speech through a pseudonym email to Hunter, who, and I'm just following the bouncing ball, sends it to Hunter, who is probably sharing it with, his friends on the board there at Burisma, the folks who run Burisma. Is this wording okay? Is this vernacular okay? No. What else do you want the vice president to say? And they're going back and forth. I mean, it seems to me like, I don't know if there's, specifics, a specific fire there, but it does seem like a lot of smoke. And it just, to me, why, if you're following the bouncing ball, that just, at least to me, seems to be obviously what was going on. And, Sarah, you've done some very good reporting. And I don't understand when we talk about, I reference the no evidence people, right? The people like Joe Scarborough and, Chuck Schumer and all of these other people on some of the, CNN and so forth, where they say there's no evidence. I don't understand how they can look in the camera and say there's no evidence when it seems to me like there's a mountain of evidence.
There is quite a lot of circumstantial evidence that suggests Joe Biden was involved in the business and at least was being kept appraised of the business, right? And so, for the Democrats saying there's no evidence, to just take a step back and look how far we've come from the way Joe Biden talked about this during the 2020 race when he said, my family's never made $1 from China. That's not true. In fact, Joe Biden and Jill Biden were given keys to share an office space with Hunter Biden's Chinese business partners once they left the vice presidency. He had many, many conversations with Hunter Biden's business partners over the years and attended a number of meetings that lined up with payments that his son later received from those foreign nationals. So to look at how far we've come from those blanket denials, that Joe Biden claiming that there was some sort of impenetrable firewall between his office and his son's business. The Democrats' credibility on this and the White House's credibility on this is pretty much shot.
Well, the problem that Joe Biden has and the problem that the Democrats have is that Joe Biden has always lied. I mean, he lies about stuff that he doesn't even have to lie about. It's just, his first, presidential run was torpedoed by plagiarism. So, Joe has been tainted by lying for his entire political career, it seems to me. And I guess my question then to you would be the no evidence people, right? So what do they need to see? And I know I'm sort of asking you to, conjecture or whatever. But, what do they have to see to be able to finally admit that there is evidence? Because it seems to you've got the Devin Archer testimony as well. You've got Eric Schwerin out there. You've got Tony Bobulinski out there saying what they're saying. For somebody to be convinced, what do you think they need to see? What's missing?
Not to use a cliche, but I think a smoking gun would have to emerge, right? Because in everything you just mentioned, it's, the official record in terms of who has spoken to Congress, who has sat with the grand jury in Delaware. All of that evidence still leaves a little bit of room for plausible deniability on the part of Joe Biden, right? The Democrats have seized on the fact that, for example, Devin Archer said most of the conversations that he overheard on speakerphone weren't necessarily substantive. It was mostly pleasantries. Now, the fact that Joe Biden was on the speakerphone during meetings, it shows that he lied during the 2020 presidential race, but there's still not that one irrefutable piece of evidence that connects him, because in all of this, there has been a little bit of a gray area that's allowed Democrats to keep on attempting to claim that there is no evidence. There has to be something that cannot be explained away with some sort of charitable interpretation.
It is interesting. And Sarah Bedford joining us, political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. And you see the polling out there that shows, and I don't have it in front of me, but if I remember, it was like 52% or so of the American people do believe that Hunter Biden did something wrong. Do you think that this comes down to party lines where it's like, if you're Republican, you know that Hunter Biden did something wrong, and more than likely you also believe that Joe Biden did something wrong? There in Washington, D.C., and in your travels, have you spoken to any Democrats who understands that there is a significant amount of smoke and that this does not look good for clearly Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden as well? Or do you think this is right straight down party lines?
Well, I think there's a lot of partisanship involved in the way it's been handled. But, it's interesting to note that there's basically no Democrat left who's still defending what Hunter Biden did on the merits, right? You almost never hear people saying that Hunter Biden's businesses were totally above board, that he was qualified for the jobs that he landed. All that they have left is to say, well, there's no evidence that Joe Biden was involved in these businesses. But Hunter Biden doesn't have a lot of defenders left among Democrats, because it's been pretty thoroughly exposed that what he was doing was at the very least unethical and in some instances illegal. And so, that's a pretty significant shift from the past few years, and a sign that I think there is some recognition among Democrats that this looks really, really bad, no matter how you slice it.
When you look at all of this, do you have an opinion either way on whether or not Joe Biden will be the nominee for the Democrats heading into 2024. There's a lot of people that say that this will ultimately, and to your point, which is a great point, where look at where we've come from, we've gone all the way back to the debate in heading into 2020, where Joe Biden said that the laptop computer was Russian disinformation, and the 51 intelligence officials and all that kind of stuff, which again, another lie. But where we've come from that point until today, who knows where we're going to be in 2 days, 3 days, 2 months, 6 months from now. Do you think this ultimately will go to Joe Biden not being the nominee for the Democrats in 2024? Do you think there might be some sort of seismic shift there?
Well, I think there is a section of the Democratic Party that would like to see someone other than Joe Biden being the nominee. And if there were some sort of irrefutable key piece of evidence, one wonders if that wouldn't be enough to tip some of those elected Democrats to start saying out loud what is sort of whispered at this point, which is that there are better Democrats to be the party standard bearer than Joe Biden who don't have this kind of baggage. I mean, not to even mention the issues and concerns about his age. Right now, there's really Democrats are still sort of unified in the defense of him, but I don't think that those defenses are as strong as they ought to be to shield Joe Biden from the type of scrutiny that would come with even just a little bit more evidence coming out that implicates him in all of this. So that's something that I think the White House is likely pretty worried about. What would happen if some Democrats started to defect, if this continues to get worse for the Biden family?
Well, and the thing is, and I know you have to go, but I mean, it's a great conversation. The thing is that the more information that comes out, the more you will have some Democrats that think, you know what, there's a piece of information that I know, or there's something that, is out there that they may not know about, they may want to know about. In other words, the worse it gets, the worse it's going to get, because you will have some of those Democrats that are thinking about, for example, Gavin Newsom or, whoever it might be that would make a far better candidate than Joe Biden. Because you're right, not only do you have the situation with, all of this with Burisma and so forth, but you also have his age, his memory, and, he wanders around the stage, doesn't know how to, get off the stage, and he says things that are incoherent. And then, of course, you have the failed policies. And so everywhere you turn, there are problems for Joe Biden. And I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. So, Sarah, where do you think this, so the last question here, where do you think this is going to end?
Well, there's two threads that House Republicans are pulling on right now, right? One is the substance of the Biden family business dealings, and the other one is the Justice Department investigation and why it's taken 5 years for 2 misdemeanor charges to collapse in court. I think that both of those threads could be really damaging for the Bidens, and both of them are moving forward. Now that Hunter Biden's legal team, it looks like it's gearing up to contest to fight, essentially, special counsel David Weiss over the drafting of that plea deal. I think that could end up reflecting really badly on Biden's Justice Department.
Lots to talk about. And Sarah Bedford, thank you very much, political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. Have a great weekend. It is 3:52. 3:57, Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate you listening. Hey, coming up, big old budget battle looms as the House appropriations fight begins in the months ahead. Matt Rosendale, Congressman representing Montana's 2nd Congressional District. He'll be joining us next on 105.9 FM WMAL.